Most of us worry if Joe Biden was better or Donald Trump is. We worry if Israel is right or Hamas is just. But what if there is no difference in Biden and Trump? And what if Israel and Hamas are two sides of the same coin in the pocket of the United States? Or, in other words, what if Hamas is a stooge of the United States? Welcome to yet another edition of WiseHeads. I'm your host, Ashish Shukla. A few days ago, Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategy treaty, which, amongst other things, obliges them to fight misinformation. But how do they do it? Do they have that kind of money which the masters of propaganda, the United States and rest of the West, could spare? Remember, only recently the US Congress sanctioned $1.6 billion to keep the narrative against China going for next 5 years. That is more than $300 million each year for propaganda to media outlets, TV channels, social media, academia, and think tanks. Imagine $300 million every year. Surely Russia and Iran don't have that kind of money, and they surely don't have that kind of reach in Western citizenry to present them their point of view. So brainwashed are masses in West that even a genocide in Gaza doesn't evoke any outrage in them. What Russia and Iran most probably could do is to keep the global South informed with truth. They might miss out on a billion people in the West, but they could gain in the rest of 7 billion of humanity. Yet, fighting this propaganda spread by West is not easy. We believe what is drummed into our ears by the mainstream media. For instance, we know that Israel and Hamas are at war. But could it be that their leadership are playing their roles defined by the United States, that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't care about the Israelis and Hamas has little concern for Palestinians? Look at it this way. After 16 months of bombardment, Hamas still survives. How? Why is that their leadership is completely safe in Qatar? Now, Qatar is a nation which hosts America's biggest military base in the Middle East. So, if America controls Qatar and Qatar hosts Hamas, shouldn't we ask if all three are aligned and completely in sync between themselves? The narrative that is fed to us is that Hamas survives because there is endless underground tunnels which run from Egypt and feed and equip Hamas in Gaza. Now, how many tunnels could there be in a 14 miles long and 100 meters wide Philadelphia corridor which runs along Egypt and Gaza border, and which Israel can't eliminate? Israel is a nation which boasts of an unmatched intelligence network. Its sophistication is so good that it could plant pagers and walkie-talkies with explosives. Its secret service has such a reach that it could kill the leadership of enemies such as Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas and Nasrullah of Hezbollah in other countries. Yet, we are all told that the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023 was an intelligence failure on the part of Israel. Do you think such a large scale attack from Gaza, which was all along under Israel's surveillance, could just be explained by saying it was an intelligence failure? Now, you would say that Hamas is hurting, Israel is also hurting. If this is a fixed match, what do they gain if both are hurting? First, you would have to understand that Hamas is not Palestinians and Netanyahu is not Israelis. Since the end of Cold War in 1992, it's been the US policy to control the world, and it believes it could only happen if the world is not progressing, if it is in chaos, anarchy, or in a civil war. If a nation or region is peaceful, it would develop, and if it grows, it would get militarily and economically strong. It could then survive without the United States. And if nations could survive without the United States, Washington would lose its supremacy. So the goal is to spread anarchy, chaos, and cause civil wars if possible. In order to do so, the United States either have client nations who do what they are told to do, and in case the nations are defiant, the US plants Al Qaeda's and ISIS and other terrorist organizations so that nation is sucked out of its strength. They create a binary in which one set of people believe in somebody and the other set of people believe in the other somebody. So if people are unhappy with Biden, they would go to Trump. But essentially, there is no difference between the two. Likewise, if Israelis see an enemy in Palestinians and Palestinians hate Israelis, they would have leaders in both parties who stoke this enmity, which thus ensures chaos, anarchy, and bloodshed. So, if more Israel hurts Palestinians, the more Palestinians lean on Hamas. And if Hamas or Iran looms as an existential threat to Israel, more Israelis would lean towards leaders like Benjamin Netanyahu. Think about it. For years, we have been listening that Iran is close to developing a nuclear weapon. If this threat is real, why would America walk out of JCPO, which was meant to ensure a nuclear bomb free Iran? We also keep hearing that Iran is the head of the snake from the West, but there was resistance to Israel even before it wasn't under the Islamic Republic. The basic tenet of America's hegemony is that there should always be friction, enmity, or a civil war. If all of this fails, then they plant terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda and ISIS to rip a nation apart and endanger the neighbors. So it is with the Middle East. If this region grows, the United States would lose control on its oil. The influence in this critical maritime route of the world would diminish. All those tens of military bases the United States has planted in the region would be useless. There would be no excuse to have them in the Middle East in the first place. You only plant them by building up a narrative of some threat. So if there are rebels in Syria, it would justify your presence there. If Sunni Gulf monarchies fear the Shiite crescent of Iran, it gives you reason to put your military bases in those countries. So it is the role of Israel to keep Middle East burning, as it is the role of Zelensky and Ukraine to keep Europe destabilized. Trump shrieks to control Panama Canal as it is a choke point for China. China's big economy can't do without maritime trade or trade by sea. If the United States blocks Panama Canal, it would hurt China big time. Or if the United States could control Red Sea and Persian Gulf, China's trade by sea is endangered. How do America's rivals counter this bullying? Well, that's very difficult. Look at it this way. The United States has over 800 military bases around the world. China, in contrast, has only one in Djibouti. Russia has 21 military bases, but most of them are in those countries which were once the satellite nations of the Soviet Union. So China might be an economic behemoth whose navy is arguably stronger than the US, but it doesn't have the capacity to project power. Russia is almost impossible to breach, but when it comes to projecting power, Russia doesn't have that kind of spread around the world which the United States has. And so it continues. Viewers could now ask, what is the way out? The only way out is for the US dollar to lose its might. Today, the world trades in dollars. The debt of nations around the world is mostly in dollars. Nations buy oil in dollars. If the US dollar loses its primacy, Washington won't have the money to spare for propaganda. Without media's brainwashing, the citizenry would have the fog lifted away from their eyes. They could see the truth, the reality. They would realize that the enemies their countries project are not enemies. The only crime of those nations is that they want to grow independent, be self sufficient. And this is the goal which the US is determined they do not fulfill. Trump sees it and he knows that if big nations have their own currency and it won't trade in dollars, he would enforce 100% tariff on their goods, implying that those goods would be costing twice as much to Americans who thus would refuse to buy them. And if the rest of the world can't export the goods to America, their economy would nosedive. Trump knows that the war against the dollar is coming. He has laid out his card in open that this is how he would counter it. It's up to the rest of the world to work out a mechanism to nullify this threat. The best way would be to develop bilateral trade without dollars, avoid the economic trap which the IMF and World Bank imposes in the garb of offering loans and aids. It would develop self-sufficiency for these nations. Self-sufficiency means breaking free of the US domination. America would glower and threaten, but it's not that strong that it could take on virtually the rest of the world. That would be an unwinnable war. That's all in today's edition of WiseHeads. If you liked our stuff, please do click the like and subscription buttons. This is your host, Ashish Shukla, who now takes your leave. Goodbye and best of luck.